So, hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Today we're going to give folks a few minutes to get online and then we will start. Hi, so we're going to get started here. Um, just people can trickle in as they come in. Dimitri, if you would start us off, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yep. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Q&A session for the Electrical Undergrounding Plan Draft Guidelines. My name is Dimitri. I'm a senior utilities engineer with the Undergrounding Division. We have an hour scheduled for the Q&A session today, but we can accommodate up to 2 hours if there's additional questions. And then before we start, we're going to start with a safety message. Take care of your posture and sit in a comfortable position. Take regular breaks to stretch, hydrate, and rest your eyes. Know the emergency exits and procedures in your physical location should the need arise. Be prepared for earthquakes. And if you feel something, say something. We will find a way to help. And then we're going to start with questions that were submitted from PG&E.
Thank you. So we did ask folks to submit questions in advance. PG&E sent us some questions, so we have them. We put them on slides just to make it easier for everybody to go through them. But please feel free to ask additional questions as we go through these. So Clayton, is this yours?
Yes, thanks, Kristen. So the first question that we received was about asking us to clarify the definition of a project and the associated reporting requirements at the circuit level versus the sub-circuit segment level. In many cases, confirmed undergrounding projects, this is PG&E's submitted question, confirmed undergrounding projects are tracked and reported at the sub-project level once past screen 3. Therefore, there are often differences between project level and sub-project level data. So our answer for this one, or at least what we want to say about this, is that most of the data that we're collecting, anything on risk evaluation, risk assessment, is all done at the project level, which for us in the guidelines is based on the circuit segment. So any more granular information than that isn't used for the screens. It is, and it's not actually recorded at this more granular level, except in the spatial data where you will submit specific undergrounded segments. Yeah, and I think Jean also had comments that she wanted to make on this one.
Jean, you're on mute. You are still on mute.
I
There we
know.
go. There you go.
I was fighting with my computer and it was winning. So my only other question is I wanted to clarify what sub-circuit segment level means. Is that just a portion of a circuit segment, and would it be the same as a sub-project?
Is there somebody
so-
from PG&E who can answer that question?
They'll have to raise their hand and be
There we are.
good.
So New, if you could unmute PGTA. Don't know who that is, but I'm assuming it's someone from PG&E. You are unmuted. Go for it. Please go ahead. So the caller who is identified as PGTA, you are unmuted. Go ahead.
Maybe we should test if there's a technical problem with the setup of the Zoom webinar, or if it's specific to PG&E AT.
Arthur, do you want to speak and we'll see if
Yeah.
you're.
Yeah, I'm just going to test it for you. How's that?
Thank you. Thank
Great,
you. Yes, we
thanks.
can hear you clearly. Okay.
Okay, is there anyone else from PG&E on the line? And I know there is, so if one of you could at least help us understand that there is someone from PG&E on the call before we answer all these questions. All right.
Great. So Alicia, you are unmuted.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh.
Is this a conference room with a bunch of, is that right, Alicia?
Oh, can you hear us now?
Now we can.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. You can? Okay, great. Sorry about that. We are struggling on our end. This is Megan Ardell with PG&E. I'm going to answer the question despite having audio challenges in between. So I want to make sure it's the right answer. In terms of sub-projects, we take a CPZ and we understand the risk and KDMMs related to CPZs. But as we actually do the work in the field and even make decisions around mitigations, we do break a CPZ into sub-projects. So we will break that segment into smaller pieces to accomplish the work. Does that address the question that was posed?
Yeah, and the second half of my question was, so is a sub-circuit the same as a sub-project?
No, because I think of it, a CPZ would be a sub-circuit, and we take the CPZ and break it into sub-projects.
Okay, so a sub-circuit is a CPZ.
Yes, as we think about it. And
Okay,
I will say, related to how we think about in our terms.
and a circuit segment is different from a sub-circuit. Can you explain that difference?
Well, the way I've defined it is we have a circuit, we break it into circuit protection zones from device to device. That is how I am translating your term of sub-circuit.
Oh, it's your term. And it's not a term we have in the guidelines, which is why I'm asking for clarification. The term we use in the guidelines, CPZ, is circuit segment.
Yeah, so we would think about that as a CPZ.
And a sub-circuit would also be a CPZ.
That's how we've posed it here, yes.
I think there's some miscommunication happening here because in this question, it asks about the circuit segment level, which we understand, and then the sub-circuit segment, so smaller than a circuit segment. And that's what we're confused by.
And this question is taken directly from what PG&E sent us.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. I think that that we are the sub-circuit segment is the CPZ, and we used it interchangeably here.
But a sub-circuit is, you're defining it the same thing as a circuit segment. So how are you distinguishing between a circuit segment and a sub-circuit segment?
Yeah, I think we should not have included the sub-circuit segment level in this question. We think about circuits, CPZs, and then sub-projects within a CPZ.
Okay.
We should walk away from that
fits.
term. Thank you for your understanding on that.
And Clayton, did we want to ask them about the different types of data for sub-projects?
Sure. Yeah. So the other question that we had was about when you're talking about sub-projects, it seems like the main distinction that sub-projects have is that they can go through scoping and permitting and other stages of construction at like different times. So is there any other difference between how the circuit sub-projects are going to be handled? Like, is any kind of risk modeling or anything done with sub-projects, or is it all, if that's all done at the project level, then I guess what do we need to distinguish the sub-projects for? And that's not saying we can't do it, but we're just wanting to make sure we know what we need that distinction for.
We do all of the risk assessment, as you mentioned, at the CPZ level. In terms of at the sub-project level, we do not bring that risk, those risk metrics down to that level. So we wanted to make sure that we understood that how the screens would apply at the sub-project level, that we really look at the CPZ level.
Okay, I think that's right. And then I think what Dr. Strawn is saying is that we can track some of the other information on a sub-project level, sort of to track where a project is in the construction phases.
Yeah, exactly. I guess my point is just that like the screens themselves are going to be applied at the circuit segment level. So all of the things, they're all about risk. They're all about modeling. These are all things that we understand are done at the circuit segment level. So any kind of sub projects and stuff wouldn't be passed through the screens on their own. They would be passed as a project, as a circuit segment. And then the lower level stuff, when it has to do with permitting or construction phases, we might be able to build that in, and that would be something we'd appreciate written comments on when those are submitted.
And I see Arthur Fisher has his hand up. Do you have a follow-up question on this topic?
Yes, I actually do. Can you clarify whether sub-projects would take place at different points in time which would thus affect the actual risk profile of a project?
And that's a question for PG&E.
Yes, thank you. Just Arthur, go ahead.
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, the answer is they could happen at different times, given the situation that we find in the field, etc. We do understand that this has impact in terms of timeline of construction related to risk mitigation.
And is that going to make it difficult to do the life of the asset analysis?
Yes, we believe so.
So in your comments, can you provide some suggestions of how you think we all need to address this going forward?
Yes, Kristen, we can.
Thank you. Okay, anything else on this question?
Kristen, can I go back to the last piece around Dr. Clayton was mentioning that it would be helpful to have comments in. We were trying to reduce the echo on our side from an audio perspective, and we missed his comment about it would be helpful to include in comments.
Sure, I can say that again. So what I was talking about was that all of the risk modeling and all of the things that we would use for the various screens, so these 4 screens that projects would need to pass through, all of that is done at the circuit segment level. The only thing that would be done at a sub-project level, as far as we understand, is the construction phases such as scoping, permitting, and building of the underground infrastructure. So we just wanted to ask for comments on if there's other places that having a sub-project distinction would be important. Like if you could explain basically if there's anywhere else that we need that, or if basically talking about it just as the construction phases at the end after a project has already passed through all the screens, then that would be appreciated so we could understand that better.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so if there's nothing else on this one, can we have the next slide, please? Great. Stefan, I think this is yours.
Yeah, so this slide has a couple different parts, or sorry, this question has a couple different parts, so we've broke it into a couple different slides. First asking, can Energy Safety share a summary of the risk modeling requirements for each step of the project acceptance framework? And then kind of question A, the ablation study requires significant data modeling and analysis. Is there an expectation for these to be completed for all projects, or are they only applied at a specific screen? And so the way that we've designed the data collection revolves around projects. Through each screen, the electrical corporation develops the metrics needed to report the activity in that screen. So metrics involved in screen 1 have to be required for, or are required for all projects that go through screen 1, similar for screen 2, 3, and 4. So next we just have a real brief summary of what each of the screens are. So next slide, please. So this is a slide from our previous workshop, and I just wanted to put it here to refresh everyone's memory. Screen 1 is circuit segment eligibility. After passing through the screen, a isolatable circuit segment, or circuit segment as we call it for short in the guidelines, becomes an eligible circuit segment. Screen 2 looks at the cost benefit analysis as required by the PUC. This is applied to everything in high fire threat district tiers 2 and 3 that have shown a significant need for mitigation through screen 1. So after passing through this, they become undergrounding projects. The screen 3 analysis is only applied to undergrounding projects, which the IOU would like to continue with. This is where we develop the separate collective and ablation analyses. Once this has been performed, the project becomes a confirmed project. Confirmed projects are then pushed through screen 4, dealing with prioritization. So on the next slide, I've prepared a real quick table just to summarize all of this information. So first column is the different screens. The second columns ask what circuit segments this is applied to. Third column, the information needed to calculate that screen, to apply it to the appropriate segments. And then last column, the data to be submitted associated with that screen. So the circuit segment eligibility is in fact applied to all circuit segments. For this, we need the overall risk score, the outage program frequency, and the ignition consequence. 3 measures that should be very familiar to everyone on the call, since they're also required in WMP filings. The next screen is the project information and alternative mitigation comparison. Here we're looking for circuit IDs and, the information needed is a circuit ID table, which is that C18, and the CPUC cost benefit analysis metrics, which get captured in table C18, C19, and C13, which again is C13 is the project index table, which has a bunch of human eye friendly information. And at this point, the projects also need to be included in the GIS data submission, showing, for example, where the lines that are being removed from, and giving an idea of what the right-of-way for the new underground line would be. Screen 3, the project risk analysis, gets applied to any screens which have passed, or any circuits which have passed through the first 2 screens, and which the IOU would like to continue considering for undergrounding. At this point, the IOU has to compute the separate collective and ablation studies, and to report that, they report it in the screen 3 table, which is C110, as well as through the risk model JSON. Lastly, the screen 4 project prioritization only gets applied to projects which have passed through the first 3 screens, and the IOU would like to consider, or would like to continue considering. The information here deals with the prioritization. We've left a lot of room for the IOUs to define their prioritization scheme, but the relevant data needing to be submitted comes in there through C111 and C112. So just to emphasize, all of these calculations are things that are upstream of the CVA. We ask for them being reported in a slightly different way, which fits our legislative responsibilities. And at time of submission, we only require that 25 projects have made it through the entire process. I'm happy to take questions here, but I know there's also a part B of this question, which Kristen will take over on the next slide.
So just putting it, so I see Arthur has a question, but first, can someone from PG&E just answer your question? Do you have any follow-ups to this? Okay, go ahead, yeah.
Thank you. This is really helpful. We appreciate this breakout.
We can barely hear you.
This is very helpful. Thank you for this.
Sure. Okay. Great. And we've got follow-up questions from Arthur Fisher and then Katie Morsoni.
Okay, thanks, Kristen. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate this opportunity. Most of my questions are actually around this process. So if folks could bear with me, I'm particularly interested in the transition between screen 2 and screen 3 and trying to understand whether I actually understand your guidelines or not. Can you describe the minimum output from screen 3 that is an input to screen, from screen 2 that is an input to screen 3? What is the minimum output? And what is that output? Could you just describe that to me for a second? What would that look like?
So, yeah, sorry. Do you want to take that, Gene?
Yeah, I'll take that. So once they complete screen 2, they're undergrounding projects, but there's still a lot of scoping and additional work, that information gathering that needs to happen before screen 3 can be done. So our assumption is that there may be a gap in time, but eventually a project that passed screen 2 will be moved forward to screen 3 unless the utility has a reason not to do that.
Okay, just to clarify, at time of submission for the 9-month review period, how many circuit segments are required by energy safety to pass from screen 2 to screen 3?
So we have 25, and part of the reason for that is just to make sure the screens are working.
Okay, and so there's okay, so 25 projects. The minimum, it would be 25 projects to go from 2 to 3 for your risk analysis, which means, and how many projects, and just to confirm, you're asking as part of screen 2 for 50% of all circuit segments above the identified project level threshold. So you're asking for potentially hundreds of circuit segments in screen 2, identified above the project level threshold, and then 25 to go through to screen 3. Is my understanding correct?
Yes, and Stefan, if you could explain more about why we picked 25.
We understand that the modeling numbers presented in screen 3 are all numbers which should be already existing in the risk modeling system, but the reporting is different than it has before. As the portfolio is developed, and more screens are added, you have to recompute these things like the collective analysis and the ablation study. So we've left room in there for that for that reporting to take place. Of course, any project under this plan has to go through all the screens, has to be reported in the progress reports. Every screen information has to be, for every project, needs to be updated with the progress reports as models change or as calibrations change due to conditions on the ground. We require some number of screens, of course, to go through the entire framework to demonstrate that the framework is being applied appropriately.
But your sample is going to be biased. You're testing.
Yes, I agree.
You're testing with a biased sample. You're testing with what are going to be the best projects. You're not testing with an unbiased sample of projects, are you, effectively?
Yes, but this is not a sampling. This is not a random collection of projects, and we would not make any assumptions that every project like this will look exactly like the ones put through the first time.
Okay.
This is understood not to be a representative sample.
Oh, okay. I've got 2 more questions to ask on this, then I think I'm done. So if people could just bear with me a second. So a minimum of 25 projects will go through to screen 3 to basically test through screen 3 and screen 4, which will mean that there will be, I'm just trying to confirm that I'm understanding this, which means that there will be potentially hundreds of projects, circuit segments, I should say, just to be clear, hundreds of circuit segments that will not have been validated through your process in any way, and that will be passed on to the commission as the list of undergrounding projects. Is that correct?
So screen 2,
it's a yes or no. I'm sorry.
okay, well, let me say I think the answer is no, because screen 2 takes care of that.
Okay.
But
help me.
Screen 2 has all of the data that the PUC has asked for in their guidelines.
Yeah, understood. So they've asked for all that information, but that will not have been validated or assessed in any way by energy safety for its ability to reduce risk. You're simply collecting that data. You're not passing it through your your objective, your screen
will-
3, your risk
okay.
analysis, or your prioritization analysis?
It does pass through screen 1, which will limit which ones can go forward, and we'll look at risk.
But you don't look at risk. You don't actually look at risk until screen 3. I mean, that's your collective ablation and separate studies are all in screen 3, not in screen 1.
We look at the risk scores in screen 1.
So okay, so unvalid, as I said, unvalidated data will be provided and not assessed, and you will be passing this on as a plan to the commission with unvalidated data. That's what it sounds like to me.
Okay, I'm not quite sure I understand, but Stefan, the risk scores in screen 1, those are coming from existing
Utilities.
sources.
Yeah, could you be more specific by what you mean by unvalidated data?
Okay, sure. You are asking for risk analysis, reliability analysis, a long-term risk reduction, if a substantial detail on long-term risk reduction for your model assessment in screen 3. That will exist potentially for only 25 segments. You will only have validated your process on those 25 segments for screen 3. There will be potentially hundreds of segments that will be unvalidated by your process. That's my concern. Because you will not have run it through, you won't have run it through screen 3. So there's going to be risk analysis done for maybe 25 segments and for your process, and then an unknown number of circuits that will not have been through 3 and 4 of your process. That's my concern.
I generally think I understand your concern, but the validation question is kind of, that word is getting at us. So
okay, understood.
Screen 3 is a more granular and in-depth look at aspects of a circuit segment.
Yes, understood.
And do you think that's necessary for validation as?
I think what you're going to do is you're going to have okay, and I'm not going to get off the track on this because it's a Q&A. My concern is the projects that have not been through screen 3.
Okay.
There's going to be a lot of analysis and risk analysis done by you folks on a certain set of projects, but then there's the remainder that will not have been through your process and will be passed straight. So you'll end up with CBRs for everything, every eligible project on the eligible project list, which is the product of screen 2.
Yep.
Yeah?
Yeah.
There'll be CBRs for that, and that will be part of the standard process passed on to the commission. There'll then be additional risk analysis that you will have undertaken on a limited number of circuit segments, which have been passed through onto screen 3. We have an information imbalance. We have 2 measures of risk at this point. We have the risk within the CBR and the risk within your process. I'm just trying to understand, and then there will be a gap in that where the remainder will not have your measure of risk. I'm just trying to understand whether that my understanding of that is correct.
That's yes.
Okay.
But it's
Okay.
not a gap so much, Arthur, as it is we are approving a plan. We're not approving projects. So all of the projects will ultimately go through all of the screens in the process. So what we're asking for at the outset of the plan is to set up the process that will work throughout the 10 years. And we're asking for enough information in the plan so that we can verify that the plan is actually working, not that the projects are the projects that should get chosen.
Understood. But without a complete set of projects run through screen 3, how are you going to demonstrate that the objective set, that the projects sum to the plan, basically? That's what I'm trying to understand.
Well, so it's not our job to make sure that the projects sum to the plan. It's the utility's job to make sure that the projects sum to the plan. So as part of the plan, well, let me just finish this one point.
Sorry.
as you know, as part of the plan, the utility submitting the plan has to submit a portfolio mitigation objective, and all of the projects have to add up to that level of mitigation, that risk mitigation and the reliability increase. So we're not telling them which projects to do, and we're not even telling them what the risk scores of those individual projects. We're just saying you have to set a mitigation objective and then you have to meet it.
Understood, but you're not validating whether they're meeting it or not, are you, within the 9-month period?
The validation is a compliance issue, not an evaluation issue. So over the course of 10 years, we will be monitoring whether or not the projects that they're choosing and the objective that they're reaching is the objective that they set out in their plan. And as part of the evaluation process, we'll look at whether or not that is a good objective that they're setting.
Part of the value, okay, wait a second. The evaluation process is, you're referring to the 9-month period of the initial assessment, or is that the compliance
The
period?
evaluation period is the 9-month period where we're evaluating the plan. And as part of that evaluation, we're going to be looking at what the utilities have set up as their 4 screens. We're looking at what they've set up for their KDMMs. We're looking at what thresholds, what standards, all the numbers in there. We'll be looking carefully at to see whether those are reasonable expectations. And then after a plan, assuming all those are reasonable expectations, after a plan is approved, we will then move into a compliance period where we will be monitoring whether or not the utility is following its screens, following its plan, and meeting its objectives.
But you are, okay, understood. And just to confirm, but you are not validating that a complete set of projects, a complete portfolio of projects meet the objectives within the not that 9-month period.
We are validating that when the utility submits a plan, that they have a list of eligible circuits and have gone through screen 1 and screen 2. So those screens have already provided information on the risk reduction that they expect from those projects and the CBRs for the alternative mitigation. So they've already done a great deal of analysis by screens 1 and 2. So it's not, what we would be looking at is, if they are proceeding with these projects, could they meet their portfolio mitigation objective?
Okay. Okay, well, we have the same understanding, but a disagreement about how I think it should work. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
We look forward to the comments on how you think it should work.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Katie, did you have a question to follow up? I saw your hand at some point and now I don't see it. Okay, we'll come back to Katie then. Okay, if there are no more questions on this, we'll go to the next question. So for this slide, we've got some questions that we'd like to follow up with PG&E on. And the first question is, can you be more specific about which data requirements you think are not necessary to make? And do you have suggestions on, if we're looking at the level of analysis being in line with the level of investments, do you have suggestions on how we should do that?
For the question, can you hear me?
We can hear you now, yes.
Great, thanks, Kristen. We were looking forward today to clarify and confirm, and we will look to include examples in our comments along the lines of your question.
Okay, great. So we're also looking for some additional information on the statement that you're making where you're comparing the 884 process with the WMP process, because the way we look at it is that the WMP process is different than the SB 884 process and has significantly more requirements. So, we've got a couple clarifying questions in terms of what analysis are we asking for in the guidelines that you think is unnecessary for the 884 process? And can you comment more, provide us a little bit more background on the assumption that we've been making, that most of the analysis we're actually asking for is already being done in some form or another in the WMP. We're just asking for upstream numbers rather than downstream scaled numbers. Can you provide a little more information on that for us?
Kristen, certainly this is a topic we will go deeper in our comments. As I consider it in this moment, I do appreciate the going back to the table that was provided around what's required for the screens. I think the ablation piece was a big question for us in terms of at what screen. For example, if potentially used at an earlier screen could be unnecessary or significant related to projects that may not advance to our earlier conversation. So that's what I think of right now, but today's conversation is helping to clarify. And as we continue to walk through that, we'll provide any additional clarification in our comments.
Okay, great. Another clarifying question we have as you're considering this is, as you know, at Energy Safety, we have a whole data team now. We worked very closely with them to develop this process. So our team is comfortable that we are fully aware of what we're going to expect in terms of the data and the analysis behind that. We've also developed some additional tools and templates to use Stefan's word to humanize the data for the stakeholders. Can you make any additional suggestions on how to assist the stakeholders in reviewing the information?
Yes, so
I meant that for PG&E. Sorry, Stefan.
I was unsure.
Okay. Kristen, I think we can take that into consideration. One, comments, two, as we file. And then finally, I think we, in any filing, in any proceeding, we are happy to work with interveners or stakeholders to discuss and explain what has been submitted. So we're happy to do that again in this process, but we'll take that question as a piece of input or feedback into our comments and ultimately our filing.
Okay, thanks. And we had one other clarifying question that you had asked about the balancing of costs for the analysis, and I'm not understanding the question really and what it is we're balancing or what you're asking us to balance, because the way we're thinking about it is balancing the costs up front of the analysis as a way to add rigor and transparency to the process, which to us seems like a good investment. But I'm curious if you could provide an estimate of how much it would cost to do the analysis and specifically which studies you think are the most costly.
Kristen, I don't have a cost estimate for you today. It is something that we'll continue to look at. In terms of effort and balancing of cost, again, I come back to the ablation study. In terms of standing up that, creating that functionality in terms of the portfolio and how it will be used. Again, I go back to this conversation continues to be helpful today in our understanding. So we will continue to provide that feedback as we move forward with answering our questions, the conversation happening today, our comments, and our comments that we submit.
Okay, it would be great if in your comments, if there are comments that and feedback that you provide on things being too costly or perhaps too onerous, if you can provide details and costs associated with that so we can understand the context in which you're mentioning these things.
Understood. Thank you, Kristen.
Thanks. Does anybody else have any questions or comments on this question that was posed by PG&E?
If I may speak to the ablation study.
Certainly.
One of the core requirements, so we've heard in this discussion and in our previous data requests and WMP filings that risk analysis happens at the circuit level. A key component of the legislation is the collective analysis. The word collective is used several times in this context in the legislation. And so in order to do that, you have to add up, although we understand it may be nonlinear addition, there may be dependent effects that have to be modeled, but you have to add up these project level risk analyses. To do a portfolio versus doing an ablation is the exact same process, just with one fewer project to add up. So I would hope that your data people are on top of this, and with the kind of less formal language and more discussion that we've had today, they should feel a lot better about this. And again, emphasizing that only screen 3 projects need that study.
Okay, so next slide, please.
So this is this is another of mine. Regarding the model risk landscape, can energy safety provide use cases for the detailed data requests to perform the process in development? So I'd first like to just question the premise a little bit. The processes that we're asking for reporting on should already exist, and there should not be any new development phase needed for this. We're looking for information from extant risk models that we either collect information from through the WMP, or that we've talked about in our previous workshops, or with the data requests that we did around roughly New Year's. And then the follow-up on construction that we had after that. We are not asking for the creation of a new system. We're asking for reporting on numbers in a form that is more suited for our probabilistic risk analysis. So that is, I don't want to get too detailed into use cases, but we would like to be doing some kind of probabilistic risk assessment to understand the comparative effects of the mitigation. We would like to understand the context of any standard or threshold which is set in the plan, and in order to judge that context, we have to understand how it is distributed, how these risks are distributed on the entire system, and also how they're distributed within the eligible circuits, so just in those high fire threat district 2, 3, and rebuild areas. Kind of the last part for why we ask for this is to be able to understand how the modeling is actually evolving over time and how it reflects real world events. So happy to answer more questions if there are any.
I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I'm assuming there are no questions. Can we go to the next slide, please? Jean, is this yours or is this Stefan's?
This is me again.
Yep, okay, thank you.
So on page 12, table 1, circuit segment information lists includes non-EUP projects and cites the appendix. So what do we mean here by non-EUP projects? And is there an expectation that non-EUP projects not funded in this plan be reported in the detail of C1? So I do agree that there is some kind of soft language here, and we will consider editing it, especially given comments on this. But in section, I would say this table is self-contained, so the reference in 2451 explains that the non-EUP projects here just look for any ongoing activities that could change the model risk landscape. So again, we're looking to understand, 3 years down the line, we have a circuit which used to be very high risk, but now we see as very low risk. If this has happened because there has been an undergrounding done as part of a GRC or some other mitigation done through some other mechanism, that is what is causing that change in that circuit's risk, not the models changing. So the second part of the question, the detailed data reporting, again, we talked about this earlier, but I think it bears repeating that The separate collective and ablation analysis are only for 884 projects and only for 884 projects at screen 3. So I have another table. If we could do next slide, please, to try to kind of just show what information goes where. So in table 1, this circuit segment information list, this is detailed in 2451. This asks for 6 different lists, one list that is all segments, one eligible circuit segments, and then so on and so forth for the 4 screens. Then the last list is the non-EUP projects. And so here we're just looking for the list of circuits that have ongoing mitigations on them, which may affect the model litmus landscape. We don't require any new modeling with this. We just require identification so it meshes with our other data collections properly. I put on a couple more rows here just to be really clear. The circuit segment identification table, which is table C15, does ask for all segments. And here again, there is a column to indicate non-EUP projects and just indicates what the funding source of those are. The project table or screen 2 table only collect information about projects which have passed through screen 2, so no need for non-EUP projects there. Same thing with screen 3, only looking for things that have already, the screen 3 table and the risk model JSONs, only for 884 projects which have passed through screen 3. So again, happy to make any clarifying questions, but I think this table says a lot.
And we will also we can post these 2 tables that Stefan has created for this Q&A period. We'll put that up on the website as well for future reference for folks. So are there any follow-up questions for this? Okay, going to the next question, please.
Right, this slide is fine. Do you have an estimate for when you anticipate issuing final guidelines after reply comments have been submitted? And the answer is really quickly, as soon as possible, but it's really going to depend on the comments that come in and what changes need to be made. We certainly hope it's quick. And then the second question here is the 2023-2025 Wildfire Mitigation Plan guideline schedule included a 3-week pre-submission review process. Do you have an estimate for how long it will take Energy Safety to complete the pre-submission review process for the 10-year undergrounding plan? So in section 3.1 of the guidelines, we address the pre-submission requirements. The utility has to contact Energy Safety 10 days before they would file an EUP. And then once they've contacted Energy Safety, a meeting will be set up and then the completeness check will take place. I think it's a simpler completion check than for the WMP, I think. But anyway, it's really just to check that all the parts are there. Assuming it is, then we would open a docket. And in theory, if this goes smoothly, you know, the 10 days is the period. Are there any questions on that one?
Okay, next slide, please.
Looks like we did have a raised hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. PG&E. Thank
Can
you.
just clarify, the 10-day notification, it sounded like 2 10-day periods, but then it also sounded like you were commenting that it would be completed within the 10-day period.
So it's the 1 10 business day period before you would file. So we couldn't do the review in less than the 10 business days, or we couldn't allow filing in that period. But the completeness check, we expect that if everyone is available for the meeting and the EUP has all of the parts, that it wouldn't take any longer than that. And there's no maximum amount of days.
Thank you.
Okay, is Stefan, is this one yours? Or this one was mine, sorry. So the 60 years is something we would very much like to hear comments back from parties on. This was a number that we had talked with staff, both at our agency and the PUC, in terms of what the expected life of assets were. So this is where this number came from. And again, we'd love to hear comments from parties on this as to whether or not they think 60 years is the correct number, and if not, what is. Are there any questions, follow-up on that?
What about, does it include the 10-year of the plan? Is that included in the 60 years?
Yes. So it would be the 10 years of the life of the asset at the time, starting at the time of the submission of the plan.
And yeah, just to directly reference the guidelines in 275 core capability 4, which is about accumulation over time, we set year 0 as the submission of the plan and fix that date, and then future modeling gets done on that. And of course, assets have variable lifetime. You don't know exactly what it is. This is our best guess from talking with SMEs. We would appreciate further comment on what others use for this lifetime.
Any follow-up questions or comments? Okay, next slide, please.
So in section 275.1, the guidelines ask for all model inputs and precursor calculations. Can we provide more background about this? So there are 2 explicit references that I'd like to point out in the guidelines to begin with for input data. 272B. Input data is data that is fed into a calibrated model and would include a description of the data collection when applicable. For the purposes in 275.1, it can be reported as a summary. You don't have to list every column in the data set, but summarize it, say what the volume of it is, what the granularity of it is, and what the provenance of that original data collection was. For precursor calculation, again, quoting from the guidelines, we mean an intermediate modeling value with explainable meaning that is computed from the input and determined in the process of computing the appropriate KDMM. So for example, if a KDMM was a risk scaled consequence, the appropriate precursor calculation would be the undollarized and unrisk attitude scale consequence values that were used for that. Something like if there is a model which is a neural network, an internal activation of one of the layers is not considered to be meaningful by our standards. So we're really here just looking to understand again what we need to collect in order to do a probabilistic risk assessment. And we welcome more comments, especially on precursor calculations. If this is something that the parties believe should be a defined term, we would welcome comments on that.
Thank you, Stefan. Yeah, any follow-up questions? Any comments? Okay, I think that was the, oh, please, PG&E.
John Eric Tallman from PG&E. Question, I just want to clarify what you just stated.
Sorry, we can't hear you very well.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, thank you.
Your example on an uncalibrated model output and then
Calibrated. Sorry.
What?
Calibrated. model output. So it's not a hyperparameter that you're using to calibrate, but something that you feed into the model after it's been calibrated or trained.
Right. I felt that was a good example. Then you stated data that was used into like a neural network model. You weren't interested. I just want to make sure I
We are
captured-
not. Sorry, I might
Okay.
have muffled that. Something like an internal activation of a neural network is not a precursor calculation. The key being that the precursor calculations are explainable and in their natural units.
So let me just cut to the chase of what I'm thinking about here. If we have a set of covariates that go into a machine learning model, and then we produce a predictive outcome from that machine learning model, does this requirement apply to that you want to see the list of covariates or variables that went into the machine learning model?
No, we would consider that as part of the calibration.
Okay, I'm not sure I understand what you mean by part of the calibration.
So
I appreciate
in the risk modeling section, the report section, there we ask for a narrative section detailing the method used to train, so to determine your covariance matrices would be there. Your input data, again, we don't ask you for all of your input data. We ask for a narrative summary of it. Or have I missed the question?
No, this is helpful. I don't want to give you tables and tables of data that you're not interested in. So this is what I'm trying to get the clarification. I think I'm understanding you for like the inputs to a machine learning model, which is our predictive models. You want to see a narrative of what it is, but not a detailed table of the provenance and the granularity and all that.
Correct. For the narrative report on models, that's what we'd like to see. For the I think for the enterprise diagram, we just like to say a bubble that says, weather data, not what count, not broken down by like what counties and what years and whatnot. We just looking for a high level understanding in that enterprise diagram table and a narrative description in the project reports.
And are you referring to the diagrams that we've provided in the WMP appendix?
The
OAS request.
Without having both sets of guidelines in front of me, I don't want to answer that directly.
Okay, it's all right.
I'm not incredibly familiar with everything in the WMP.
That's okay. What you just stated tells me, I was interpreting from that the diagrams that we requested to provide in the appendix of our WMP might meet that requirement, and unless that's why I wanted to check with you. If there's not a problem with that, that's probably how I'll proceed to document this here.
I would advise that you read our guidelines very carefully, and then if you still have a question on whether or not they're appropriate, you can reach out to us and ask that again.
I appreciate that, and that's why I'm asking these questions, because I'm trying to really understand what you're after. I don't want to give you stuff that you don't want, and it's just going to be waste everybody's time. So
and we don't want to be confusing about what we're asking for. So happy to have an iterative process on this question.
Okay, that's great. I think we're good. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that was the last question. Really appreciate PG&E submitting questions.
We have.
Do we have one more?
I think we have several more.
Oh, sorry.
This next one is Gene, I think.
Oh. Okay, the question is, as referenced in section 2.8, reporting metrics and appendix C, data organization and structure, when do you expect the reporting related template files of the draft guidelines to be made available on the e-filing docket on the Energy Safety's website? So I understand the templates are pretty far along in the process, but they're not yet ready to be posted. I think this is actually Clayton would be more knowledgeable on that.
Sure. I don't know if I have much more to say than Gene just said, but
I guess
yes.
by the time the final draft guidelines are released, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we are working on those. They will be available when the final draft is ready.
Any other follow-up questions? No. Okay. And question 10. Jean, I think this one is yours.
Okay, on page 64 of the draft guidelines, energy safety states, these guidelines contain some requirements for content and updates to progress reports. Energy safety will issue additional guidelines on this topic and other post-approval matters. Do you intend to provide more information about the progress reports in the disposition of an approved undergrounding plan? If not, then when will more information be provided about the progress reports? So we are expecting two things to provide more information. One is this second set of guidelines that will govern the post-approval process, and some details on the progress report will be in there. But then for the individual plan, we will set more detailed requirements that are geared towards what that utility needs and what's appropriate there. And those will be developed out of Progress Report 0 and will be final in the approval.
Thank you. Any follow-up questions on that? I don't see any. Thank you. Next slide.
I think this one is the last one, and with the relatively easy one. In core capability 6, how is energy safety defining enhanced vegetation management? Again, from 275, we don't define any of these terms. The alternative mitigations are to be defined in the EUP submission by the IOU and then reviewed as a part of energy safety's approval process. So intentionally undefined with the intention that they are formally defined by the electrical corporation, who understands how they do these mitigations. Any questions?
Okay, and as we mentioned this, again, thank you, PG&E, for submitting these. It was very helpful. Anybody else have any questions on anything that's been brought up or any additional questions? Arthur.
Thank you. Thank you for all this. I really appreciate it again. I have one last question, and again, it's just to clarify the purpose of the output of screen 2, so the eligible project list. As I understand it, energy safety has to make findings as part of 83885.5 that a plan will substantially increase reliability, et cetera, and reduce wildfire risk. Is that going to be based primarily on the output on the eligible project list? Because that's how I'm understanding this at this point in time. Is that effectively that is going to be the way you determine how you satisfy that particular section of the code?
It's an aspect. We'll be looking at the whole plan and especially understanding how all of the screens work together, and other, the narrative portions of the plan as well.
Okay, so it's the list plus the narrative portions of the plan. Okay.
And also the plan mitigation objectives, which measures the macro scale goals of the plan,
which are set for which are set for the entire portfolio, for the whole portfolio, not just a portion of the portfolio.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
PG&E.
A couple other questions. The first is CPUC decision 2212-027 authorized use of standard dollar valuations, but in the May 9th workshop, OEIS requires metrics to be reported in natural units. as opposed to dollarized units. We put things in dollars so that they're in like units. We're concerned how to normalize different attributes if we do not monetize. Can you help us with this issue?
Yes, according to the user guide for the RDF that you published as part of your ramp last week, all of these risk attributes exist in natural units before the dollarization, which is a multiply by V, and then a risk attitude, which is a piecewise linear function just labeled F. So you have F of Vx, we're looking for X, not F of Vx. Again, we don't ask for balancing of them. We don't ask for scaling. We just look for these upstream computations.
Okay, thank you. And we have one more. Can you help us with understanding what does delta mean in relation to the project variable modifiers table?
Yes, on that table, just using delta as the common shorthand for change. So how has it changed? Has it changed by a percent? Has it changed by a set value? This depends on the way that the model works, and we've been kind of, again, purposefully vague to allow for this to be applied to any type of model.
Is it a change in the risk score, a change in the cost, a change in whatever unit we're using?
It would be, yeah, it would be a change depending on the appropriate unit, and there is a row for each factor. So for each of the output metrics, it could be reported differently.
Thank you. And do you guys have any other questions? Otherwise, we'll go to Arthur.
Not at this time. Thanks, Kristen.
Okay, thanks. Arthur.
Sorry, I just didn't unmute myself. My very last question, I promise. So at this point in time, the purpose of passing data to screen 3, passing projects to screen 3, is purely to test your process for compliance. There's not going to be any decision made upon anything that goes through at that point. Is that the right understanding?
Can I take a first shot at that?
Sure.
So part of screen 3, right, is understanding the mitigation criteria. So it's understanding how the thresholds which will be used for compliance are represented in the data. So the answer is sort of.
Appreciate the answer.
That is not the answer that you were looking for. But if you could ask the question again, maybe you can give a more specific answer.
I mean, my kind of basic question is to make sure that your process, the request for the minimum of 25 segments is basically to make sure your process for compliance works and you understand that it works. It's not really to assess whether, it's not really to achieve, shall we say, to make findings that are required as part of the 9-month process, as part of the 9-month review. That's what it seems like to me. Is to make sure your processes work, not to make sure that your processes for compliance work and that you understand them, not to make sure that that you're meeting you as in energy safety are meeting your obligations as far as the statute is concerned on demonstrating the plan.
Well, so part of the plan, having screen 3 is to make sure that the utility is putting together a plan that is going to substantially reduce risk. So what they're doing in screen 3 is demonstrating a reduced risk. So the plan has to articulate how exactly they would be doing that. And the projects that are going through that are demonstrating to us that that screen is actually demonstrating reduced risk.
Yeah, your screen is functioning, but it doesn't demonstrate that the plan reduces risk. Screen 2 does that.
We would
That's
also want screen 3 to
Contribute.
support the conclusion.
Okay. Yeah, agreed. But
I would also just again point out that screen 2 alone does not do that. It's in conjunction with the plan mitigation objective, which is measured at the portfolio level. And
understood.
the portfolio develops over time.
Understood. Thank you.
Sure. And I see PG&E has a hand up.
From PG again, I apologize. I should have asked an additional question on the PVM delta, if I could.
Sorry, we can't hear you very well.
My apologies. I wanted to ask an additional question on the PVM delta question in table 4. I understood our discussion, but then I look at one of the examples for vegetation and it says -1 zone. I'm not sure what that's supposed to be.
Yeah, so again, the values in the tables are hypotheticals. We're trying to illustrative purposes only. There was a designation of different zones for different veg manage regimes, then a project could move it from one zone to another, and that's the way that the model could take place. This is again not a requirement, illustrative purposes only, but maybe not the most illustrative example.
No, that's actually helpful if you're not measuring it if you're measuring it by category and you're meaning to show that it changed the category is what you're
exactly that.
Okay. All right, that's clear. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Are there any other questions? I am not seeing any. Greatly appreciate everybody's participation. These were really good questions. We're happy that people have questions that are reading the guidelines. Again, comments are due on the 29th of May and reply comments are due on the 10th. Again, please feel free to reach out to us in the meantime if you've got any additional questions. And thanks everybody again for your participation.